Estate planning, probably one of the biggest issues our family ranches have to deal with and often avoided or done incorrectly in an effort to try to save money, thus creating bigger problems after mom and dad have passed.
Normally speaking, probably the biggest issue is to figure out how to hand over the operation to the next generation.
Attorney Dal Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma joins us today as we discuss topics like a trust versus a will.
A trust that's revocable is just really a substitute for a will. But what that substitution does is really important.
Also, we'll discuss the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust and practical information on LLCs, plus much more in our legal discussion today on estate planning. Yeah, you might be thinking this is a show mom and dad need to listen to, but if you ranch in any way, shape, or size, no matter your age, I'd advise you to stay tuned to today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Good to have you with us on our program today. As you heard there in the opening, we're going to be sharing with you, again, a conversation that we had with attorney Dal Houston as we look at estate planning. It's really a subject that, quite frankly, never gets old when we look at our agricultural industry. And so many folks in the industry, and there's so much of it that goes on where we're at a point where it's got to be passed on to the next generation, or something's got to be done with the estate. And so today, as we look at that, getting a legal perspective on that from attorney Dal Houston on that, sharing with you a conversation that we had with him a couple of years ago that we had on here. But I think it's relevant again, and I want to bring it back to the forefront, partly because as I look at some of the upcoming shows that we are working on here at the Working Ranch Radio Show, some of it is going to address that. And some of that's also going to be talking a little bit about the cattle markets and the industry and the rebuilding of the cattle herd. And you say, well, how does that play into estate planning? Well, you might be surprised that there's a lot of conversations in the mindsets out there and in our industry with the cattle markets where it's at, of some ranch families deciding maybe this is the time that they make a move. And so that's why it's relevant to our conversations we're going to have here today, and as we look ahead at some of the other shows that we're going to have here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. We're going to get to that in a moment. I think you're going to enjoy today's conversation with attorney Dal Houston on that, so make sure you stick around for that. Before we get too far, have you had the opportunity to get through your latest issue of the Working Ranch magazine, the September-October issue? I know it's been out for a couple, 3 weeks or so, but as always, full of a lot of great stories and articles in there. If you haven't had the opportunity to do that, look through that. It does have the annual cattle care catalog in that. And for those of you that are regular subscribers, thank you for subscribing to Working Ranch Magazine. If you're not, you can get started today by going to workingranchmag.com, or you can stop by your local Tractor Supply store as well and pick one right up off the shelf there. And a shout out to the Tractor Supply store in Bath, New York, in Brenham, Texas, in Chiefland, Florida, and in Clemens, North Carolina. Well, I trust everybody's fall work is going good. If you're a regular listener, you know that last week we took the week off, the show off, to take a little bit of time for ourselves. Still had quite a bit of fall work this past week, and we'll continue for the next few weeks as well. We'll finally get our final preg testing done here in a couple of weeks on the big bunch of cows. But we did get the heifers tested. Things kind of getting shifted and moved around as we get ready for fall, and it looks like the weather is starting to make some moves as well. So we'll talk with meteorologist Don Day about what that weather looks like for the next 7 to 10 days out. So stick around. He'll be coming up later on in the show. Stick around. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll jump into our conversation with attorney Dal Houston. Again, our subject here today is getting kind of a legal perspective on estate planning and how that applies to all of us here in the ranching industry. This segment today brought to you by Allflex. It all starts with the tag, the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions.
It all starts with the tag. Identifying each animal allows you to better manage the entire herd and control your operation's future. For nearly 70 years, producers have chosen Allflex for individual animal management. With AllFlex, you get the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions. Whether you need stock or custom visual tags, electronic tags, tissue sampling units for DNA collection, or syringes, bring the AllFlex advantage to your operation today. Visit allflexusa.com to learn more.
This segment today is brought to you by SmartLick. You know, when your cattle protein supplements fall short, there's three things that are going to happen. Number one, you're going to lose time. Number two, you're probably going to lose some money on the deal. And number three, more importantly, you're going to lose herd performance. With SmartLick protein tubs, they deliver consistent, self-fed nutrition, improving conception, calf health, and gains. Backed by research and trusted nationwide, SmartLick protein tubs save labor while boosting reproduction, calf health, and returns. No wasted effort, just proven results. Feed smarter, not harder. To find out more or to find out who your local SmartLick dealer is, you can go to their website at smartlick.com. That's smartlic.com. Well, as we turn towards our subject at hand here today on a topic that really is probably one of the bigger issues for ranching families. If you had to pick the top three for a lot of ranching families, agriculture families out there, farming included, boy, I think you're going to say estate planning is going to be in the top three, if it's not probably number one or number two. And when we look at that in terms of how they need to be formulated, whether they plan to pass it on to the next generation or migrate out, various things, structure and protection for liability reasons, and just a lot of different elements go into this. And so before we start, I do want to be very clear that, you know, our show today is not by any means intended to be your legal counsel or your legal advice. It's purely designed and provided as explanation and provide considerations as you are working through your estate planning purposes. And with any legal matter that we talk about, it's very important that you seek your own counsel on that. And so with that in mind, we're going to turn to our guest here today, attorney Dal Houston, who is with the firm of Benson and Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma. That's just northwest of Oklahoma City. Not only is he an attorney, but he's also a rancher as well. And so it's good to have him with us here today. Dal, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Dal, I think when we start here today, because we really do, as you and I were visiting before we went on air here, there's really a lot of topics that we can get into, and I hope we can get enough stuff covered here today. And if we can't, I'm more than willing to do a part two of some of this, and we can get to some of these other topics. Part of the reason that we're addressing this topic here today is the fact that it is big to our ranches and our families, just in terms of a lot of different elements that are involved in that. From your standpoint, when you see ranchers coming into your office, what is one of the biggest issues that you're having to address from an estate standpoint?
Normally speaking, probably the biggest issue is to figure out how to hand over the operation to the next generation. And a lot of my clients will have maybe a son or sons or a child who's interested in taking over the operation, and other children who have no interest in the operation. But at the same token, that rancher or farmer, that client is wanting to be fair to the other children, and at the same time fair to the child or children who is taking over the operation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So as a general rule, that is one of the big things we encounter in our estate planning practice. The second would be is if we've got a situation where maybe no one's wanting to take over the operation, and what do we want to do with that land? How do we want to hold that land? Do we want to leave it in trust for our children? Or do we want to distribute it to them so that as soon as that person dies, that land becomes their children's land, and now they can do whatever they want with it, whether it means selling it, potentially losing it, mortgaging it, giving it away, doing whatever. So out of those two topics, that would probably consume 80% of what my clients are concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that makes sense. I think you nailed exactly what are the, just in my mind, as I asked that question, I thought, well, here's what I've had to deal with from a personal standpoint, and you kind of nailed both of those. So now that we've identified the issue, for lack of better words, or the issues, let's start to flesh out some of the tools or the things that can be used to handle estate planning. And I know a lot of these terminologies for a lot of us, we've probably heard them, but as you and I were talking before we went on air here, I'm not an attorney, so some of this stuff just doesn't stay at the top of my mind awareness of trust, the difference between a revocable, irrevocable, how that differs from a will, and all these kind of things. So let's just start with a trust and basically providing some definition to that and how that functions in regards to estate management.
Okay. Probably the best place to describe or define what a trust is and there's all kinds of trusts. There's irrevocable trust, there's revocable trust. And what I'm going to talk about primarily when I'm talking with trust, unless I specifically say irrevocable, I'm talking about a revocable trust. And think of it as just a last will and testament substitute. A last will and testament is saying, distribute my property as follows to my children, X, Y, and Z, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And a trust that's revocable is just really a substitute for a will. But what that substitution does is really important, and that is a will has to be probated. A will has no effect until that person who made the will dies, and now that will is offered to probate. And whereas a trust is likewise created while that person's alive, but it's got aspects of it that will let you carry on normally without probating the person's estate. They can have provisions in them to say, if I've got a farmer or rancher who says, I want my estate to continue on, or I want my operation to continue on, I leave the property in trust for my children. And this is a trustee who's in charge after I pass away or become incapacitated. And my beneficiaries are entitled to the income, or they shall distribute this property to them. And really, a trust can do a lot more than that, but it's simple. Just to try to keep it simple, or at least here in the beginning, it is really just a revocable trust is just a substitute for a will. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So when you say it's a substitute for a will, and you maybe outlined this a little bit, but I want to make sure we answer this question. For ranchers that are in light of, a lot of times we're talking multi-million-dollar type estates, would you suggest a trust or a will?
Well, the more complex your estate is and the larger your estate is, just by definition, you probably would be going more likely with a trust, just that it's more complex. You may have issues that come about that you want to handle expeditiously. Let me give you this example. We're in Oklahoma, and at times we will have oil and gas booms going on here. And during those times, things are happening very, very quickly, and you don't have time to sit down and do a lot. You want to be on top of things. And so let's say that you're a landowner and you're in the middle of something like that, and you want to trust. So if I'm in the process of executing an oil and gas lease, theoretically, it may not be politically correct or politely correct if you want to look at it, but somebody could have a trust and die at 10 o'clock in the morning, and somebody could be executing on behalf of that trust and on behalf of that deceased person an oil and gas lease at 12 that noon. It just lets you continue the business without any hiccups or things that you've got to worry about. Whereas, let's say that you had a will and you had ongoing business. You had the cattle in the feedlot, or that you were moving a lot of inventory, or there was always something. There was always business decisions that had to be made with third parties, banks, realtors, lenders, that type of stuff. Then a last will and testament for the person named in that document to have any power to deal with those issues has to be admitted to probate. And that by its very nature means that it had to be filed with the court. Normally it's going to have to be set for hearing with the court, which requires notice to everybody that's a family member that's listed on that document. And so you can see by just adding that layer or those layers of things that have to happen, you've got decisions that need to be made in a fairly expeditious manner. You've now created a timeline where you cannot make those in that kind of time period. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. My guest today is Dal Houston. He's an attorney with the firm of Benson and Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma. Today, as we are talking estate planning and topics and issues, the tools that can be used in that. We were just learning a little bit about a trust versus a will. We've got more to cover. We're going to be talking coming up in the next segment. What's the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust? We're going to be talking joint tenancy, LLCs, a lot of things that we still have to cover. So stay with us. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. In a world of variables that are beyond our control, there's a tool that can provide certainty for your breeding program. I'm talking about Identity Beef. It's the first genomic profile designed for crossbred commercial cattle. Now, here's a tool that's going to utilize DNA to rank the genetic merit for 17 key traits, from maternal to performance to carcass traits, as well as mitigate risk factors, for example, like congestive heart failure. It's time to take the gamble and the waiting game out of your breeding program. Make accurate decisions with confidence and uncover your herd's potential with Identity Beef. To learn more, contact your Neogen representative today or visit neogen.com/identity-beef. Well, our topic today, again, on estate planning. My guest today is attorney Dal Houston. He is with the firm of Benson and Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma, and we are talking on estate type topic here today. As you were just hearing in our first segment, Dal did a good job of explaining and kind of, probably in my opinion, dead-oning the topics or the issues that he sees from ranching families that are wanting to come in, and how do they handle their estate? How do they set this estate up in terms of trying to pass it down to the next generations, being one of the big topics that folks are coming in to the office. And I know for each and every one of us that are in ranching, that just rang a bell for a lot of us in some way, shape, or form. We talked a little bit in the first segment about a trust or a will. And Dal, you talked a little bit about the advantages of a trust versus a will, especially when we're talking a little bit. Typically, our ranching estates are a little more complex than just a house in town sort of a thing. So when we get to that, then the topic we start hearing is, okay, we got revocable versus an irrevocable trust. So let's talk about the differences between those two.
Okay, sure. And it happens every day in my office that somebody will come in and say, my neighbor down the road told me I needed an irrevocable trust, or I didn't need one, or they had done a trust and it worked really good. But there is really a broad line distinction between the two types of trust. The revocable trust is really, as I said in the beginning of the interview, more of a will substitute. It is just substituting for a will, and it's trying to avoid probate. It is probably addressing estate taxes to some degree, but its still main purpose is to say, upon my death, this is how I want my property distributed or held or whatever. An irrevocable trust, on the other hand, is a trust that takes effect at the time you do it, and it says it's irrevocable. And what you're trying to do there is transfer property and value out of your estate. Now, I'm not saying that estate taxes still don't affect farmers and ranchers, but in today's world, the estate taxes, and they go up every year, but they started out in 2000, I believe it was 10 at $10 million, and they've escalated from there. Now, before that time, estate taxes were dramatically lower than that. You could have estate taxes that kicked in, I believe, at $750,000, $1 million. And so it didn't take owning very much farm and ranch land or any other kind of wealth for that matter before you had an estate tax issue. And what they would do is create these irrevocable trusts that you would put property in that, if you did it right, would not be considered part of that client's estate when they passed away. And hence its value wasn't brought into the calculations for estate tax purposes. So as a general rule today, while estate taxes are still around and irrevocable trusts are still around, their use isn't as great today as it used to be when estate taxes were lower. And I know people like to complain about taxes and estate taxes, but boy, I tell you what, 10, 13 years ago, estate taxes were a lot bigger issue than they are today. And I'm not saying they're still not a big issue, but again, with that higher exemption amount, it sure takes a lot of people out of having an issue of having estate taxes. So the main difference is if somebody's talking about trying to shift property and get property out of their, and that value out of their estate, they're probably talking about an irrevocable trust. On the other hand, if they're just talking about how do I distribute the property on my death, they're talking about a revocable trust. Does that make sense, Justin?
Yeah, it does. So real quick, I want to just make sure I got this part right, because you said now irrevocable trust would be if somebody's wanting, you're going to see those used more likely in transferring property out of the estate while you're alive. So do you still see, even though the estate tax ceiling is really not a factor anymore, give me a little bit more definition of where you would see that from a ranching standpoint? Or the need for that versus, for
one of the places that we would see it is still in estate taxes. And there's a lot of large farming and ranching operations that will in fact have estate tax consequences. And so you're still going to see it in those larger operations. The other place you would probably see it is let's say that you wanted to be shifting your operation to the next generation. And your options are, I can just deed that property to them. And now it's out of my control, though. So if I deed it to my son, or I've got a client that deeds that property to their son, and now the son is running the farming operations, they can potentially lose it, mismanage it, whatever. Whereas if you said, I want to transfer that over, but I want to protect that property from mismanagement, from creditor problems, that type of stuff, I might create an irrevocable trust. So instead of just the client giving that land to their child outright, they create an irrevocable trust with these are the trustees, and it may even be that the child's a trustee. Mm-hmm. But what you've done is you've created a break between them actually having firsthand ownership of that and just having the right to use it, subject to the terms of those trusts. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I could see that. That'll help some folks. All right, let's go to the next element of this, and that is, let's talk on a couple issues, and we can get to them respectively, but let's first hit joint tenancy.
Yeah, joint tenancy is generally a very simple estate plan and a simple concept, whether it be with a bank account or with a piece of land. It's the way you title the ownership of that. So I'll use a piece of land, and that is I buy a piece of land and I want to take it as a joint tenancy with my wife. So it just says from the grantor to Dal Houston and his wife as joint tenants. And what that does is those very words have legal meaning. So the first one of us that would die, the property would vest in the survivor. Mm-hmm. And so it is very effective in moving property between spouses upon their death. Where we find it to not be in a very effective estate plan is when clients want to use that to bring it to the next generation. So I've often seen a wife come in whose husband is deceased, or a husband whose wife is deceased, and say, hey, I've got 3 kids and I want a simple estate plan. Just put them on as joint tenants with me. And that's where we really see a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. Just because all of a sudden that is considered not just a gift for gift purposes, but you have vested ownership of that property in those people that you've now listed. And again, that's not a bad thing when it's you and your wife, or your wife and your husband out buying a house, because they're going together normally and it's a joint effort, and you're listing both of them as co-owners, and that with that rights the survivorship that vests in the survivor. But now all of a sudden you're doing with this next generation coming up. And oftentimes it's just they're doing it for convenience sake. And whereas the parent still considers that property theirs, and it can lead to a lot of problems, as we're kind of talking about before the interview.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're going to talk more about this, folks. We're going to take a break here. And I think one of the things that Dal just mentioned there, joint tenancy has some advantages, but the thing I wrote down in your comments there was, if you're planning to pass this estate down, joint tenancy may not be the ticket. Folks, stay with us, because we do have more topics. For example, we're going to be talking LLCs and some topics like that I want to talk about a little bit as well. Just a reminder too that our program here today is not intended to be legal advice. It's really only designed to provide some explanation and some considerations for you in your estate planning. And just like in any legal matter, it's important to seek your own counsel in this. So stay with us. When we come back, we're going to continue on. But first, this message from the captain, Tim O'Byrne.
Hey everybody, Tim here. We're fixing to come up on 1 million downloads of our Working Ranch radio show podcast, which is really exciting. And it got me to thinking about another viral moment that we had back in 2017 when we ran a short Facebook video of the Safety Zone calf catchers. And it was so popular, it got 6.8 million views in the first 5 days. I want you folks to check it out, Safety Zone calf catchers. It's a great product for all producers. Keep you safe when you're working with baby calves, especially for old timers like me who maybe can't outrun those cows anymore. Check them out, Safety Zone Calf Catchers.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone Calf Catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone Calf Catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today is attorney Dal Houston with the firm of Benson & Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma, and we're talking on estate planning. And if you missed the first couple of segments that we've already had in my conversations with Dal, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that, especially if estate issues or estate planning is a big topic to you as a rancher. And I really think, as I said earlier, if you had to list the top 3 items or things that are really weighs on the minds of ranchers in terms of your estate planning and how that is all put together and managed, is really a big thing. And we've already talked with Dal about trusts versus a will, and also the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. And just when we finished up in the last segment, he addressed joint tenancy. Now, Dal, I want to move on to some other things to be looking at or considerations as well, and that is limited liability, LLCs, and that's something, of course, for my own operation. That's the way we're set up, but I want you to expand a little bit on the pros and cons of an LLC.
Okay. Obviously, LLCs have been out there for quite a while, and a lot of people know they need them, but they don't fully understand them. And what I like to do is first just say an LLC stands for a limited liability company. Okay. And so I don't want to overburden the subject, but if I'm a farmer or I'm any kind of person that runs a business and I do not have an LLC, so I'm just operating Dow Houston, maybe it's Dow Houston Ranch. And somebody, I've got a pickup going down the road and it goes over the median and hits somebody. They can sue Dow Houston and they can sue and get a judgment if their damages are enough against everything that Dow Houston has. Okay. So if that's my pickup, my ranch, my cattle, let's say I'm an attorney, so I've got my own business in town, I've got some investments, anything that is Dow Houston can be attached and satisfy that judgment. Whereas if I've got a limited liability company or an LLC, whatever you want to call it, that the liability that somebody can seek is limited to what is in that company. So let's just say that I own a ranch and my cattle operation is within the LLC. So it's got the pickups, maybe it's got the livestock, but the land is not in there. And so that pickup is now driving down the highway, has a wreck. The only thing that somebody who's injured by my company or that company could get would be the assets within that company, again, which would be the pickup, potentially the cattle, whatever other assets were in there. And so we see a lot of your more risk adverse ranchers and farmers segregating their business in such a way as to limit the liability as best they can, to really use some strategic thinking. And that would be like this. I've got a lot of ranchers who have their own semi. And as we were talking before the interview, that semi is a big, powerful truck driving down their highway with a load full of cattle, and people driving it are tired. To me, the ranch itself has very little liability. It's just sitting there as land, in a lot of cases, doing nothing except letting cattle graze on it. Whereas that semi is going down that road hundreds of miles, depending on where you're hauling cattle to or from, and through cities and everything else. So strategically, a lot of clients would say, one of the first things I'm going to do is limit my liability on that semi to an LLC. And the only thing that's going to be in that LLC is that semi, and maybe they got multiple semis, so that transportation wing of their operation is limited to that company and that company only. So if one of those trucks would have a wreck, the only thing they could get would be the assets of that company, which again would be the truck itself, maybe some equity in the truck and that type of stuff. They might also strategically plan further. So if you've got a farmer and rancher who says, I farm some, I ranch some, I've also got a semi that runs down the road, they may create an LLC for their trucking operation. They may create a farming LLC for their farming operation, because again, probably the next biggest liability that I see is running big tractors up and down the road with big wide machinery. And so all of a sudden, instead of putting the land in that LLC, it's the tractor. And then what the land does is they rent the land to that farming operation or to the ranching operation. So the ranch and the farmland's always protected from these more higher risk activities.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Dal, just a couple more questions as we have to tail out here in just a bit. And I would be remiss if we did not head down this subject, and that is the cost of setting this all up. I don't think there's probably a ranching family that would not see the value in the tools that are available that we've talked about here today, and trusts and LLCs and various things of that nature. But at the same time, there's just a real fear of moving forward on it, because what is it going to cost? When we look at costs, there's definitely, it's a double-edged sword. You can get what you pay for. It's pretty simple to set up joint tenancies or to do transfer on death deeds. May not cost as much, but then there's caution there, especially when it looks when you're wanting to pass your estate down to the next generation or have it managed in some way, shape, or form in the future. So when we look at the cost of setting our estates up, really, I think the question is for a lot of us is, man, what is this going to cost me? That really is a big concern.
Oh, I understand it is. And of course, we're tied in with other professionals, just like accountants and things like that. And the only thing that I can really say to that is, yeah, I can, like so many things, I can avoid some costs and say, okay, I'm going to do the cheap estate plan and everything. And I have clients that come in and say, they'll be talking to me about an estate plan, and they say, well, gee, this seems pretty complex and it looks like it's going to get pretty expensive as well. When my dad died, he just put all three of us kids on as joint tenants. And as they're going through and telling me the story, maybe it did work out, but it was just, in some cases, they tell me, and then they add just that little bit of the story to say that had it just changed slightly, the wheels would have just run off of it altogether. And so I think it's like anything in life. And that is, if you're looking at something and you say, I've got $100,000 worth the assets, then you probably look at, okay, what do I invest? What is a good rate of return to invest in those assets to protect them and to plan for them? On the other hand, if I've got $1 million of assets, should I be willing to spend more to figure out how to protect those assets or distribute those assets on down the road? And some people, just to be honest, it depends on everyone's value of a dollar. Some of the way the people put $1 million ranches and operations together was watching every penny and being careful with every penny. On the other hand, obviously the bigger your operation, the more thought and probably the more precision that needs to be put into the planning to make sure it goes on. So, me personally, I obviously try to watch my money as best as anybody. And that is a really hard question to say, how much should I put into it and how much should I not? There's not a great answer and there's not a wrong answer.
Yeah.
But I do know the more complex your operation is, it's just going to require to be a prudent operator and to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. You probably want to spend more time and effort with than you would if you had a very simple operation.
Yeah. Well, I can guess that the third topic, as you said, when most people come in, 80% of the people come in with two questions in its regard to passing down the estate. I'm guessing the third one is, how much is it going to cost me? So
that is normally a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Final question here. We're going to have to kind of hustle through this, but and again, folks, you need to seek your own legal counsel on this. We're just providing some thoughts for you, some explanation on things. But if you just kind of roughly could just outline a way that you would set up an estate, a ranching family's estate, let's start from the top and work that down. What would that look like?
I've got a more or less normal go-to strategy, whether this would be a trust or a will, when I'm looking with a client who has the next generation who is coming into the operation and maybe children who aren't. So let's say they've got 4 children and one of them's coming into the operation and the other 3 are not, but yet that client is wanting to be fair to the children who are not in the operation. And normally one of the things I recommend and that I just start with is to say, listen, what I would do is I would create, if it's a farm, for instance, I would create a farming LLC. And I would put in that LLC all the farm equipment, farm pickups, that type of stuff. And I would leave the land that you own outside of that. And so the land is basically a landlord. Mom and dad are a landlord, and they lease that land to the LLC. Then, as that child starts coming into the operation, they buy into that LLC. So every tractor that is purchased, for instance, the child is also signing as a co-maker on that note. They're buying into it. They're earning equity in that LLC as time goes by putting their time and effort into that LLC. Then what you do is the estate plan itself says something like this, and that is, upon my death or death of client, all my interest in the LLC goes to child one. That is the child who's coming into the operation. Everything else, which would be the land, the outside investments, that type of stuff, are divided between my kids equally. What you've accomplished by that is you've still treated the children that's not in the farming operation fairly, or at least if I've attempted to treat them fairly. You've also rewarded that child who stayed home and worked within the LLC or in the farming and ranching operation. You've let them slowly acclimate in there. And so what they are getting is that farming operation, the rolling stock of it, that type of stuff, but the real value for most people still is still being held in the title of those lands and things like that. You can do the very same thing if it's a ranching operation. That is kind of my go-to place where I originally start. Now, that's not to say that every farmer or rancher I have ultimately ends up there, but at least that is the starting point generally for talking about here's how I would do it. And then there may be nuances to it that they may add this to it or take this away from it and that. But as a general rule of thumb, when I have someone come to me, that's how we start the discussion.
Okay. And I think that's helpful. And really the concept here today, folks, was really to get your mind rolling. I know estate issues, passing down the estate, it's got to be one or two in topics that weigh probably on the minds of those that are wanting to pass the estate down. And so I know it's a big topic here in the ranching industry. Dal, I appreciate you meeting with us here today and doing this. I know we've kind of scratched the surface on a few things. We could probably go deeper on some other things, but we're limited a bit here on time. And I do appreciate you joining us here today on this topic.
Oh, you bet. I'm glad to help.
And again, my guest today has been Dal Houston. He's an attorney with the firm of Benson & Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma, guiding us down a little bit more insight here on this topic of estate planning and estate management. Again, here today was to provide some guidance in this. By no means is this intended to be legal advice. It's just designed to be an explanation and provide some consideration for your estate planning purposes. And you really need to consult with your own legal counsel as you move forward with all of this. But the thing in all of this that I also realize that it really is important. I realize this is a tough subject. Mainly it's tough because we think of two things: the cost of putting it all together, and then the discussions that may have to happen with our families and our family estates in order for this to be set up. And when we look at that and the amount of time and the effort and energy that have been put into these estates over the years to put it all together, and then for it to just crumble because we did not move forward with good planning, well, I'll tell you what, it's hard for me to deal with because I don't like to see our ranching families, split up, both our relationship-wise and also land-wise. So when you look at this, think about your heritage and what you want to leave behind. Do you want to see the broken walls of an estate just come crumbling down upon your death, or do you want to see it transfer down to the next generation in a good way? And so think about those things. Stalling out and not doing anything is definitely not something that would probably be well advised. Again, I want to thank my guest today, Dal Houston with Benson & Houston out of Alva, Oklahoma. Now, if you have questions and you want to reach out to him, their website is bensonhouston.com. They've got a rich, long history in the state of Oklahoma, but I'm sure he'd be willing to answer a lot of questions. I appreciate him joining us here on our program today. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day joins us as we take a look at our long-term weather. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
Today's Long Range Weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer. You know, for a lot of us, we're going to be working cattle this fall or through these winter months. And while we have them in the chute, it's a good time to continue on with a good parasite control program. None other than Long Range Epernamectin. With its extended release dewormer, you're going to get 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Take the pressure off those cows by getting rid of the parasite pressure in those cattle with Long Range Epernamectin. To find out more, go to their website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, as we turn now to our long-range weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. I know you've been on the road here this past week, but as we look ahead, I know one of the things in listening to your shows this past week, as we see the change of weather, this pattern across the country this particular weekend, looking ahead, it looks and it sounds like a lot of the different models that you all rely on and work through, kind of some confusion and not really in agreement on what you anticipate as we look out for the next coming week or so.
Yeah, and that's not to be totally unexpected as we transition from one season to another. There's just a lot to keep track of. It's getting colder in the higher latitudes. It's still very warm near the equator in the lower latitudes, but losing 3 or 4 minutes of daylight a day really starts to add up, and that cold air begins to build up north and things begin to move. And then once you start moving all these things with all these other weather variables as you change the season, the computer modeling just can't keep up. Now, it's still going to do okay, the weather forecast in the next 3 to 5 days. But, you know, a lot of people these days, they want that 10 to 15 day forecast. And right now, this time of year, we're having a hard time doing that.
Mm-hmm. So with all of that, I mean, I know I'm going to ask you specifically, what do you think, though? Because we do have all these different models that are predicting different things. But as you look about the next 7 to 10 days out, what do you think is going to happen?
It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. Okay. What I see happening is the tug of war of seasons is really going to be felt in October. Now, we just, have been experiencing this here recently with some snow in the northern Rockies, and we've got some frost freeze conditions in parts of the northern plains and northern Rockies as the first real good shot of cold air this fall season has just come out of Canada. What we're likely going to see is a big battle between these bigger pushes of cold air out of Canada and the lower latitudes, the subtropics, still throwing stuff northward. So this gives you a lot of up and downs with temperatures. And this is really where you can have one extreme to the next. And we saw this in the past week. We saw some very warm, almost summer-like conditions. And then a couple of days later, this cold front comes out of Canada and things look a lot different. It's going to be a seesaw back and forth. And I think this is going to be true for all of the U.S. Where you're not going to be stuck in one pattern in particular in October, but there's an expression as you get into October with the weather. In September, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but in October, it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back in terms of temperatures and conditions as the weather changes. And that's what we're going to see. The cold fronts are going to be colder. In between the cold fronts, we're going to still have some warmer periods, but it's going to be a busy month. There's going to be a lot on the table. We still have the opportunity for tropical storms and hurricanes, whether it's off the coast of Mexico or the southeastern United States. And October can bring some pretty big storms, especially in the higher elevations of the West.
Mm-hmm. You know, a conversation that I'd had last week with the Captain Tim O'Byrne, we were talking about one of the issues in the ag industry that's big right now is the Mexican screwworm, as it's concerned about it moving north and closer to the United States. One of the deterring factors, of course, as we would expect with insects, is colder weather. This colder weather, and again, it's going to be just kind of what we're experiencing now, but any anticipation that we're going to see some of these lower latitudes get some colder weather, that might help, a little bit of that.
Yeah, there's going to be some episodes of cool in October. In fact, we see some temperatures in the southern plains starting off a little bit cooler. However, you got to wait probably that November, December timeframe before you're starting to see that penetration of colder air at those lower latitudes getting in there. Now we're looking at some new data rolling in that 90-day period, looking at November, December, January, February. And a lot of the trends that you and I've talked about with the long-range forecast are still on the table, which is that along and east of the Rockies into the plains, it still looks like a cold winter. And if it's cold there, you're going to get cold front that get down into Mexico and far south Texas. And whether or not that will discourage the screwworm, I don't know, but there will be an opportunity for colder weather, but it's going to come later.
Yeah. Real quick, let's check on our Corn Belt weather across as we look for the next 7 to 10 days out. I know the colder weather we're experiencing this weekend is pretty widespread, some moisture along with that. But do you think we're going to see some of that southern moisture flicking that far up into the Midwest?
Yes, but I don't think enough to cause any major harvest concerns. It's been pretty dry in a lot of the Corn Belt for the last 6 weeks or so, where if they do get rain, I don't think it's going to be a lot, and I don't think it'll be anything that's going to cause any significant delays.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing this time of the year, and with this kind of weather ups and downs, what's a little concerning for me is this is also a time where we would call it the fall run in the cattle business, of a lot of cattle being put on trucks and trailers, moving, heading to new locations. And of course, that little bit of that stress that can happen in there and these temperatures that are fluctuating could create some issues.
Yeah. When you have 85 one day and 35 the next, those extremes isn't healthy for anybody. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is definitely something we're looking at over the next 6 weeks.
All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update and hope you get back safe.
Thank you, sir.
We'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
And again, that was meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our long-range weather. If you want to follow along with him each and every morning on his daily video podcast, you can find him at dayweather.com. Today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Epernumectin. To find out more, go to their website at longrangedwormer.com. After the break, stay with us. I'll tell you what we're working on for upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
It's more than a convention. It's where the cattle industry comes together. CattleCon 2026 is heading to downtown Nashville, February 3rd through February 5th. Gain insights from top cattle industry experts, connect with fellow producers, and take part in shaping the future of our business. Plus, world-class entertainment and inspiring keynote speakers. Whether you're there for the business, the education, or the good times, CattleCon is where it all comes together. Register today at convention.ncda.org.
Well, folks, I got to tell you, the fall lineup of shows that we are working on here on the Working Ranch Radio Show are going to be absolutely stellar. I think, when you get in a group of folks these days, one of the first conversation pieces that comes up is going to be, of course, the markets and how long they're going to stay up, when are they going to fall, what's the herd expansion and the retention rate looking like, all those kinds of things. Well, we're going to cover those topics on upcoming editions of the program. Also, another topic we're going to hit at some point is country of origin labeling, as well as the USA Beef Act that starts on the 1st of January. Want to kind of get caught up on all of that, and we got some other shows as well, so you're not going to want to miss out on future shows. By the way, if you miss something, you can go to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com, find all of our shows, or if you have a preferred podcast provider, you can do it there as well. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.